Everyone, if I don't use the microphone, can you hear me? That way I usually like to kind of wander around and not stand behind the podium and whatever. So thank you, Kathy and Michelle and Carrie for putting this on. It's great to see a community and a school district be proactive in terms of working to communicate about what strengthens families, which in turn strengthens kids, and hopefully then keeps them safe and resilient, because the world can be a challenging place, as we all know. So basically, we could really talk forever on parenting and child rearing and the risks, and just communication alone could be probably months of meeting, 3 or 4 hours a night. You probably have master's degrees at the end of this if we met for all this. There's just so much stuff, right? There's tons and tons of material. So, but basically what I tried to do here is I'm trying to be a purveyor of stuff that I've run into working with families and kids and adolescents and all kinds of people for about 42 years. So, so basically I've had the opportunity to not only learn from a lot of really, really smart people over the years by going to workshops myself and listening to a lot of great lectures from a lot of great speakers and writers and research people, but also I've had the opportunity to learn a ton basically sitting in front row seats to help with helping people. I mean, that's where you really learn. Graduate school is cool. It's kind of nice and everything, but it's really kind of a sterile environment. It's not like in the trenches, right? So you pick up a lot of stuff along the way that, in my opinion, is really useful in terms of being able to find things that we can all kind of hang our hat on to kind of understand stuff in a way that might be really useful at home. So it's not necessarily a really like this deep, intricate dive into any one thing, as much as it's a lot of, I think, helpful stuff as an overview, and any one of the slides I'm showing could probably be another 4 or 5 hour or all day workshop. But here's the deal. If you have any questions on any of the slides, any of the material, anything I'm speaking about, please ask, all right? Just promise me one thing. Don't leave with unanswered questions. Does that make sense? Don't do that, because I don't want you to leave thinking that, there's something, God, I wish you talked about that. And, we got a small group here. We can talk about whatever you want. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. So, so basically what I've, the title of this was just basically, we kind of have strong children if we can have strong families. And there's a little takeoff of John Gottman's. Anybody know about John Gottman? John Gottman's, this guy is an amazing dude. He's written all these books on marriage therapy and marriage counseling. Here's why, because he's dedicated 40 years of research at the University of Washington out in Seattle to studying couples and families. And he has a template that he calls the Sound Relationship House. So I thought that was like a cool thing, like the Sound Family House. And Gottman was actually a mathematician. And he realized that very early on, when he was a young guy, he was really striking out in terms of meeting women. And he thought, you know what, I gotta figure out what in the heck am I doing wrong? And then, so that became a career of researching relationships. And thank God, because the guy has amazing stuff. And if you ever want to read a great book on marriage, for example, he wrote a book called The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work. Incredibly good book. So highly recommend. A little paperback. It's not like a psychology textbook. Very easy to use, easy to understand, and very practical. Great stuff. All right. So that's where that comes from. Sound Family House. And so we're going to talk about those things. I'm going to show this twice, but there's some great stuff on a website that I have, DrRobRobinson.com. And if you need information about the practice that we have in Wilbraham, we have a website at FCCA FICA.com, all the information about what we have. We are pleased, by the way, to say that in the beginning of October, we were able to, we have a child and adolescent psychiatrist that started at the practice. There's about 12 of us now there, and there are 2 medical doctors. One is for adult medicine, and then we have Dr. Nate Summers, who started with us in October for child and adolescent medicine, which is kind of like a miracle, because it's unbelievably hard, if anybody has any idea about this, to try to find child and adolescent psychiatrists. So we're very fortunate. If you know anyone who needs to see a child psychiatrist, we're not asking because Dr. Summers is not busy, but he's not full yet, and he will be probably by the end of this year. And then, like every other person trying to get in to see an adolescent child psychiatrist, it'll be months and months and months and months. But now's a good window. Little inside scoop from Family Care Counseling Association. All right. So I've done a lot. You guys probably know I've done a lot of stuff. I'm not going to take much time to talk about this, but I was at Westover Job Corps Center as the director out there for about 10 years. This is essentially like a high school principal, only the difference is all the kids live there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That was fun. That was never a dull moment. And then I always had a private practice going in. I started a Family Care Counseling Association, which is kind of, it was never intended to be as comprehensive and as large as it is, but it just kind of kept growing. So I've been doing that as a backdrop for about 40 years. So, which means that I'm a really old geezer. I started as this young guy with dark hair, and now it's like, holy cow, that's a long time. I'm also a fellow of the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy. I taught for 10 years at Springfield College and St. Joseph's University, teaching in the marriage and family therapy training programs in both those places in graduate school, which is a great place to meet a lot of great students and hone your understanding of a lot of the stuff that works with families. And then for 10 years, Bo Sullivan in Westfield, who was with Brad Shepard, and on Thursday mornings we had this thing in drive time called we were supposed to be there for like 1 week talking about positive psychology. It turned out to be every Thursday for 10 years, right? And Brad named it Shrink Wrap, and it really had kind of a cool little following. We just did topics in psychology that people listened to driving into work in the morning, so that was a lot of fun. And then I currently do mass appeal segments the first Friday of every month. Do a live segment on mass appeal. All of those things, by the way, all of these mass appeal things are available on my website, which I'll show again at the end. So if you want more information or see those segments and a lot of other stuff, it's all free. You don't have to pay for anything. It's available to you if you want to look. Okay, and then I was trained under Martin Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania in positive psychology. So that was a really cool adjunctive set of skills to add to the whole repertoire, because positive psychology is like really positive. And it's all about what's really good with people, right? So the whole thing is about finding what's right and building on that rather than kind of diagnosing all the unhealthy things that we're all about. So that was a really cool thing to add to that. And then in June, I graduated from the Eckhart Tolle School of Awakening, because I do a lot, I kind of transitioned and transformed kind of my work. So I do a lot of practical applications of spirituality in helping people in my practice. Because I found that, that's another dimension that is just so unbelievably powerful. So that and studying with Eckhart Tolle was amazing. Everybody ever hear of Eckhart Tolle? You get a chance to read. He wrote a wonderful book called The Power of Now, and he's a really cool dude. But if you get a chance to read that book, that's amazing. And also, Stillness Speaks is one of his books. It's a great thing too. I also am a consultant with a wellness company, Health 401k, and that's been great because I've been able to fly around the country, and still doing that, doing workshops for mostly corporations and wellness on stress management and a lot of other things. Some of this stuff we're talking about here will be included in that, so I enjoy doing that. And also, I've been husband and father, and now grandfather. Right? We have a little granddaughter, 28 months old, the love of our life. But this stuff, not so much grandfathering, because I've only been doing it for 2 years, but husbanding and fathering, that is the essence of education. And I have a quote from Betty Davis. at the end of this. It's kind of funny. But this is where the real learning took place, and also all the mistakes, and and trying to correct all the mistakes. It's much easier, I find, working with other people's kids than my own. My kids are all grown up, thank God. But it was never an easy journey sometimes. So, sound family house and building strong kids. There's no way, as you can all imagine, that we can start to talk about this without talking about the health of us guys, the parents, or parent, at the center. Right? You think about that for a minute. If we're not, and there's always the stuff the world kicks up, and it's always challenging and monstrous, but if we're not really doing well, right? If we're not really doing well, then, it's like the nucleus of a cell, right? So if the nucleus of the cell's not going well, the whole cell's not going to do well. So strong families really start with us being on top of our game as much as we can at the center, right? So because we really can't give what we don't have. And it's so unbelievable, as you can well imagine, right? We meet all these great families in counseling and all the things we do, but there's a lot of folks, parents, right? People who are supposed to be the leaders at the center of the family who are really struggling with a lot of things. And so many things that it gets to be incredibly distracting. And, the state of mind, which we'll talk about in a little bit, the state of mind we're in, right, is the filter through which we see the world. So you can imagine that the state of mind is filled with anxiety and depression and worry and stress and an absence of, some joy and some positivity. That's the filter through which we look out and see the world. And we make the mistakes as parents and we externalize that and say, God, these kids are, all this stuff. But it really, perception we have of things is just our state of mind being reflected back to us, right? We see things through a filter. We'll talk about that. But strong parents at the center, it's important to take care of ourselves, right? Really. And I don't mean in a selfish way, by the way, because we've got a lot to deal with. But, mental well-being, physical well-being, good nutrition, proper sleep, watching out for alcohol and substance abuse, positive relationships, healthy connections. That stuff is really essential for us, right? Because we're at the center trying to steer the ship. And so if we're at risk, or not even so much at risk, but burned out, stressed out, whatever, you can imagine the implications that has. Again, this could be a huge workshop, right? Just that alone. But I always tell people in my practice, because sometimes people say, why did that person act that way? Why is this person like this? Well, the truth of the matter is, and this is always equal, what comes out is what's inside. How could it be any different? Right? If you squeeze a lemon, you get lemon juice. What comes out of humans is what's in there, right? So you don't have to really have a degree in psychology to understand what might be going on in someone's life. You just kind of watch what comes out. What's that like? What's the flavor of it, right? So you can imagine that if we're not doing well, we're stressed out as parents, we're not taking good care of ourselves, what's going to come out is not necessarily going to be all that constructive and helpful. So that's why it's really essential that we take good care of ourselves at the center. And so let me just ask this, because this is an interesting question. So tell me, raise your hand, or you don't have to, you can shout out, what constitutes a healthy parent? This is not a trick question. There's no right or wrong answers. I'm serious. What do you think constitutes a healthy parent? It's kind of sharing is a cool thing.
Like a arrested parent?
A what?
Arrested?
Arrested. Yeah. If I were close, I'd high five you. Yes, right? Because the whole, did you know that? Can I tell you this? I'm I don't have, this is not a senior moment. Sometimes if you see me stopping and the slide comes up, what I've learned to do is just I wait till stuff, I mean there's always stuff, but I wait till what pops up. But then when I'm thinking of quoting statistics, I like to be as accurate as I can. 63 million Americans suffer from sleep issues. 63 million.
That's a lot.
Well, what's that?
That's a lot.
That's a lot, but that's huge. Well rested. So we're talking about wellness and strong parents at the center of a family. Sleep. It's essential, right? If we're not sleeping, what's the first thing to go when we don't sleep? Well, yes, mood. High five, right? Mood is the first thing to go. That goes like over, that's like, no pun intended, that's going overnight, right? You wake up crabby, no patience, no space for anything, you know? Oh my God, so that was a good one. What else? What would constitute a healthy parent?
When the parent was on, release stress, if it's exercise or whatever, that you're on.
Yes.
Balance.
Good stress relief. Exercise being one of them. That's amazing, right? And you don't have to become like the triathlon person. You can charge your battery in your brain just by walking, right? If you committed to walk 30 minutes a day like every other day on a treadmill and got your heart rate up, that actually charges your brain battery, which is amazing stuff. Ever want to read a good book about that? A guy by the name of John Ratey, R-A-T-E-Y, wrote a book called Spark. You'd be high five. Yes.
I thought you were going to say it.
Right? Really cool stuff. Now, I could talk about that for an hour, but I won't. We have a lot of slides. But that's a great book. But exercise and brain physiology and stress relief, huge, huge component to our well-being. Kids too, but we're talking about parents right now. Anything else? We get it all? Two things? Yes.
Well, I think like this healthy parenting, like it's that balance of creating like an independent individual while providing guidance. Like I always see like that push and pull, you know, like that
Yes.
walking that balance need between
Taking care of yourself and taking care of your kids.
like maintaining
Yes.
boundaries while have like
It's huge, right? We talked, there's a slide in here somewhere that says something about boundaries. I'll get to it and then I'll remember why I put it in there. But I think it has to do with that, right? If there are no boundaries, and there's nothing in place to protect our space, right? And there's many people, many parents who have no boundaries. Did you ever see this?
Oh, yeah.
Again, you don't have to like go visit like a hospital setting. You can see this like at McDonald's, Friendlies, you know, anywhere in public. You can see the non-boundary parent, right? And they're frazzled because there's no boundaries, right? So that's a really big one. That's what allows us to create balance. That's like, okay, it's 8:30, everybody in bed. The next 2 hours are me, right? But the kids aren't in bed because they're playing video games till midnight. Right? Crazy stuff. Anyway, what else? Thank you. That was a good one. Yes.
We need structure. Good parents give, make their kids feel safe and they provide a structure.
Yes. You mean routines?
Yes.
Regular meal times and bedtimes and stuff like that?
Yes.
High five. Yes, structure. It's huge, right? Think about it. In the absence of structure, we have chaos, right? And there's a lot of chaos, right? In Gottman's stuff, he talks about like marriages trying to exist in these chaotic family environments. I mean, it's not easy, right? I mean, just all hell breaking loose, right? And we're trying to have connection in that setting. So that's a great one. What else? You guys are hitting on all of them.
It's a connection, talking and listening.
Yes, connection's huge. We're going to talk a lot about that tonight. That's big, right? Connection's the centerpiece of relationships. And we're going to talk about that and the importance of it, but also what interferes with connection. So, any others? So, look at it. I mean, the whole idea is common sense. That's why it's great to have people talk about this, because they're just very obvious things, right? But they're things that get easily overlooked, and when they're overlooked, then the health erodes, and then that's where the problem happens with the leadership and the resilience of the parents at the center. right? You just got to take care of yourselves. That's essential. All right, thank you for that. That's great. So, connection is critical, right? Connection's critical. So, what we want to see in a strong family is we want to see family members that are turned toward one another rather than away. Turn toward one another rather than away. And that has three ways. You can be turned toward someone in three ways, right? So when I do couples therapy, it's always interesting to see in the first visit where people sit and how they align themselves, right? You have the couch, and if someone chooses to sit on the couch and another on the chair with body language turned away, cross legs, and turned away from the person, would that be clinically significant? Yes, that's turned away, right? We can be turned away from someone in thought. You know, well, right? The story in our head, turned away, right? And then we can be turned away emotionally, all the negative emotion. Turned away behaviorally, not making any deposits in the emotional bank account, right? So in a sound family house, we have healthy parents at the center, and we have people who are turned toward one another. Physically, mentally, and emotionally. That's a very important dynamic. There are many families who don't think about that and operate turned away from one another all the time. Imagine what that does day to day to connection, which is a centerpiece for resilience in kids and for us as well, right? Huge thing, huge topic. And we like to see that deposits, meaning behaviors that actually add something to all of the members' emotional bank accounts, right? This is going to come back up later when I get to talking about managing conflict, right? But this is really big. So what does it really mean? Well, it's pretty simple, right? It's trying to catch people doing it in the family, but you can do this too with other people. It's trying to catch members of the family doing things right and telling them. Not just thinking about it. Wow, I really think she's right. Wow, I really love the way you handled that. Thinking of it, but not saying it, right? Saying it is what makes the deposit. And the more you make deposit, and not for fake, lame stuff. You know, that's just not good. You know what I mean? You can tell when it's fake and lame. It's got to be like genuine and authentic, right? But when deposits are being made, like, I love the way you handled that, or that's a great idea, or you know what, this is amazing when you do this, or you know, the stuff like that, that builds like this emotional capital, right? It broadens and builds the individual self-esteem, and not in a fake way, because I'm going to talk about fragile versus real self-esteem in a bit. So deposits are being made in the emotional bank account. That's not easy oftentimes, especially when you start raising teens, right? Remember the state of mind's the filter, and we have the story going in our head about, you know, oh God, this kid's driving me crazy. So we have that negative story flipping through our head about members of the family. Try making a nice positive emotional bank account deposit in that state. It's not easy. But it's essential to make sure that we kind of wipe the slate clean every day and make those deposits, right? Very important for connection. And there's also fondness and admiration being expressed. You can always tell when you're fond of somebody. Right? Usually if you have a best friend, you're like really fond of that person. And you're fond of them, you kind of in some respects maybe admire them, and you know, you like connecting with people when you're fond of someone, you have admiration for them, right? So finding things that we are fond of and admiring in our family members and letting them know makes for robust connection, right? It makes for positive sentiment in the family, not negative sentiment. right? Not always, but think about this, right? We talked about before, if we're not feeling well ourselves as the parents in the center, who the heck feels like expressing fondness and admiration when you're not feeling great yourself, right? What comes out, what's inside, always equal, right? And another thing, and this is not rocket science, but when I have people in for couples therapy and they come in and all they're doing is arguing, talking about negative stuff, is there anything in the emotional bank account? No. There's no fondness and admiration being expressed. There's no connection, right? Weakens the whole system. These are legitimate variables that really impact strength and connection within a family. So, very important step. And also look at connection, if there are rituals of connection. I mean, rituals of connection, you talked about structure, right? People have dinner together. I mean, dinner together, what the hell is that? Right? That's like a thing of the past.
With no phone.
We're going to talk about that one in a bit. But you're right. That's a real barrier to connection. But rituals of connection, here, it's like when we say goodbye to people in the morning, hug and kiss, have a great day, what are you doing? Hug and kiss when they get home, hug and kiss going to bed. Rituals of connection for the family to celebrate things. Rituals of connection when things maybe are tough, right? Things that we not necessarily think of as rituals, but that they happen every day routinely, right? People begin to depend on those rituals of connection to feel connected. It's when there's no connection, or when connection begins to become eroded and corrosive because of some missing stuff, that's where the risks take place. That's when things get tough, right? So connection's a huge piece. Any questions so far? Anything anybody want to bring up? Anybody have any questions at all? We with me so far? You would tell me if you had a question? I guess.
Because if you're always getting the positive things and a day that you don't, you really miss it.
Yes. I mean, you're used to it,
Yeah.
and then it doesn't happen?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, God, yeah. So the kids, what's the matter? Oh, I used to talk to me like every night, and she didn't the last 2 nights. It really feels awful. Good point. Right? It's like the fabric of, these rituals are really important. That's why, if you can grab dinner together as often as you can, or ritualize that as much as you can, that's cool, right? How things end are really important. Like how the day ends is essential. Learn that one in positive psychology from Seligman. Like the day can be really crappy in the beginning. Hey, you're supposed to be up now. The bus is coming. It starts really bad, but if it ends good, look at it. Just a little crabby this morning. I love you. Here's what I admire about you. How days end really critical, right? So the opportunity to end the day with connection, whatever rituals you have for people kind of saying goodnight to each other, really cool stuff. And you cannot overlook the importance of that. Really important, right? So we look for rituals of connection. And if there are not many, we try to begin creating those things because that's really strengthens the fabric in the family. Okay, barriers to Why is that one the first one?
Oh, big time.
Why?
Because they don't want to talk.
Yes.
But not just kids.
It's adults.
No, it's all of us.
Everybody.
Look at it. I want to say this, all right? There's no way that I'm anti-device, so don't misunderstand. Okay, I'm not anti-device. I mean, I love words with friends, love YouTube videos, love watching, what? Yes. So, but it's not good if you're always playing it, or you're always on your phone, right? And so I've learned the hard way. My wife is very good at letting me know if we're having dinner. Can you? After I finished taking the Eckhart Tolle School of Awakening about the importance of I don't want to sound corny, but it's really true, the importance of living in the moment, inner stillness. These things are really not good, right? Because here's the deal, right? They buzz and bing and flash and do all this stuff, and they demand our attention. And if people are taught, you know what I love about it? So again, you know, you sit down, first therapy session, people come in, and we'll have the couch, and there's like 3 cushions, right? So now, guess what happens? A person occupies 1 cushion, and the phone gets the middle cushion. I kid you not, right? The phone is present. Take it out. Place of distinction, make sure it's on. And then we start talking, and if we're talking and the phone goes off, what do you think happens? That's right. Excuse me, I have to get this. Look at it, it's your copay. But then we talk about that at the end of the sessions like that, especially when it's going off like every 5 minutes. I gotta get that. It's unbelievable. But that's the nature of things now. Go out to dinner, right? Look around and see people. My wife and I were down. We were down in West Hartford at the Cheesecake Factory not long ago, and there's a row of benches right on one wall, and then there's these tables, and then a chair. So there's like 6 couples this way and 6 couples that way. We happen to be right in the center, right? So I'm ordering, and then thank you very much. And look to the right. Look to the left. That's interesting. So there's 12 couples. So I said to my wife again, look. I said, just look left and right. Tell me what you see. What do you think you see? Yes. Everybody's out to dinner, but literally no one's talking. Just like this. This is it. What's that? Yeah, probably. Gotta hope. Right? But connection, these devices are like unbelievably intrusive in human relationships. And they are essential for a lot of reasons now because we've really become addicted to them. However, it's really good to start playing with not dealing with it unless you absolutely have to. That's really the key, right? Not that we can get rid of them, because you really can. But it's a really good idea not to be, especially our kids. I mean, oh my God, we went to that for hours, right? Kids are like so addicted to these things. So are parents, but kids really, right? People walk into fountains. Did you ever see the videos?
Or falling into train tracks.
People fall into train tracks. People are taking selfies on the edge of the Grand Canyon and fall into the Grand Canyon. It's madness. It's madness. Stress is a barrier to connection. Why? Because there's no patience, there's no space. Stress really disconnects us because we're not available. Right? The world, when I say the world, I mean the world we live in, our world, the world we interact with every day, the stuff we have to encounter, and the greater world too, if you're into the news, media, and stuff like that, which I have, not because, isn't that amazing? I found that by listening to the news, I was getting so crazily aggravated that I can't listen to the news anymore. And it's not just been a recent thing, it's been like now probably about a year and a half. And I drive home with nothing on, right? Because it creates space. The world, there's a certain frequency we live in. And it has a profound effect on our state of mind. It really does. The key to knowing that is awareness, right? And if we're not aware, we get pulled into that negative frequency. And we're not aware, we're not conscious of it. It's kind of almost like a dreamlike state where we're just kind of in a state of aggravation about a lot of stuff. That's the frequency the world operates in a lot of times, right? And if we don't pull back from that by disconnecting from the devices, having boundaries to have rituals of connection, to have space to actually be present with one another, we're not available. We're not even available to ourselves. I I like when I do a spirituality workshop, and the first session is, the first night is, can you stop thinking? And people look at you like you're nuts. What? No, can you stop thinking? That's the frequency, right? And that takes up space, especially if it's about negative things, right? There's no availability, there's no room for anything, so people have no patience, right? When you see someone with no patience, because they don't have any room, it's stuffed. Barriers to connection, drugs and alcohol, these are obvious. You know, people, you know, if I had to list 2 reasons, and really, and this is not a deep dive, this is very broad brush, but 2 reasons that people drink essentially, who drink to do stuff. I mean, it's not just, you know, having a glass of wine with friends at dinner. People who really drink to drink, they drink for 2 reasons.
Forget.
To what?
Forget.
To forget, to put up walls, or to take them down. Either to be the life of the party or leave me alone. Drugs similarly, right? A lot of stress management with these things. But the problem is the more we or kids use them, the more we destroy our prefrontal cortex and the neurochemistry that makes us operate, right? So alcohol is a depressant of the central nervous system, right? It also diminishes the production of serotonin in the brain. Certain drugs diminish the production of dopamine. It's hard to feel happy without them after a while, not to mention all the other risks, right? So it's a huge barrier to connection if people are using this stuff to check out or to cope with stress. Because why? They're not available. So these are obvious ones, and I know you guys are going to have more workshops on this stuff, but this is huge. It's a real problem. So if we don't have boundaries around our space and time, our families, in order to connect, then we don't have time. So boundaries in terms of protecting our rituals of connection, the structure that you talked about, even for sleep, all the things you brought up, it requires boundaries. There's just ways of just making sure, you know what, we're not doing anything tonight, we're hanging out. And there won't be any video games. That's an invitation for treason. They will throw you overboard, right? You bring that up. But boundaries and time are essential for connection. And I said already, the state of mind piece is so important. If there's one thing you can take away from this as parents, like just look at with awareness your state of mind. State of mind, it's like sunglasses, right? So if I said, look, here's what we're going to do. We're all going to put on these sunglasses, and we're going to wear them 24/7, and we're going to do it for the next 3 or 4 weeks, right? Just wear these gray sunglasses. So what would the world look like?
That's what wants to have.
Well, gray, right? If we had gray ones or dark ones, it'd really be dark. And if I took a lemon while you had those sunglasses and I said, okay, what color is this? What would you say? Yes, but it's not. It's still yellow, right? But that's what happens with the filter. Whatever's going on in our head, the story in our head about whatever, becomes the filter through which we see things, and it distorts a lot of things. How we look at our partners, our kids, our life, our jobs, and then we externalize it. We say, oh my God, all that out there is so bad. And it's really us. What we're seeing is just a reflection back to us of our state of mind. That awareness is so key. Because if that can be corrected, and you don't see yourself as the story in your head, that we're much deeper than that. That's the essence of what makes us healthy. That could be a 6-month workshop. Okay. So, all the things we talked about in terms of connection and fondness and admiration and staying turned toward the members of the family, right? What we want to see is we want to see positive sentiment between people overriding the family. And we're going to talk about that in just a minute on another way. But that's what we want, rather than negative sentiment overriding the family dynamic, right? In other words, what's it feel like to live here? You know, I mean, some days are tough, right? I'm not talking about the days that are tough. I mean, things happen that make it hard sometimes, right? But I'm talking about the prevailing climate, the prevailing mood of the house. Is there positive sentiment between people overriding the atmosphere? That's what we need to achieve. That is the goal of what happens in counseling when people are hurting, right? Replacing negative sentiment override, state of mind, stuff like that, with all the other things we just talked about, the ingredients of creating sound relationships. That's the key. When that's sound, kids have a better chance. Much better chance. Okay, so let's talk about managing crisis, conflict, and challenges. Not that there's many of those in family life. When I taught graduate school to marriage and family therapy graduate students, I love this quote by Harold Nichols. He's a playwright. And great quote, you can desert families in the greatest secret of a successful marriage or family is to treat all disasters as incidents and none of the incidents as disasters. What does that mean? Anybody want to take a stab at that? Not a trick question.
Speed light a little lighter.
Yeah, I mean, in other words, don't die on every hill, right? Because tomorrow's going to have its own set of challenges. And that's, you know, I said earlier, it's kind of like wiping the slate clean every day. That's not an easy thing to do because remember I talked about the frequency of things? Well, you know, I mean, a lot of things influence how stuff affects us. Certainly, our own histories, right? Our collective life experiences that get stored in the memory banks of things. You know, our parents parenting us as the template of how we should be doing things. Oh, God. Seriously. I grew up in South Buffalo, New York, Irish Catholic neighborhood. A lot of drinking parents there, right? It was crazy insane. It was madness there, right? I love my family, honest to God, there's none of that stuff. I'm just telling you, it was crazy stuff, right? But if we're not alert, we get pulled into the frequencies and it gets really nuts, right? And then we start beginning to see things through this crazy filter like this family's wow, and then carry that to the next day and the next day and the next day. And that becomes the state of mind. No wonder people are stressed out and give up because that's the filter. But they're just thoughts. It has nothing to do with reality. I love A Course in Miracles that says, oh, day one, the Course in Miracles, 365 lessons to live by. One lesson for each day of the week. Lesson one is nothing in this room, in this space, out this window has any meaning. Wow. That's good. That's great. That's good news. I'm the painter of the picture, right? But we don't think that way. We externalize that, right? So we don't want to die on every hill, especially when we're trying to manage conflict, because if we carry that conflict from one day to the next and it doesn't stop playing in our heads, that informs how we manage conflict. Not usually good. I love Carl Jung's quote, there's no coming to consciousness without pain, right? So conflict is inevitable in families because it involves humans, right? Humans are imperfect. We are really messed up in a lot of ways, but you know, we try to do the best we can, right? So conflict is inevitable. You know, no one ever comes into my office. Every single visit I've had for 42 years, without exception, are there because of some other person, directly or indirectly. It's amazing. It's wild, right? So how can there not be conflict? So that's the point, right? It's conflict, okay? It's conflict. This is today's conflict. You stay alert. I mean, it's good when there's no conflict. Steady conflict's bad, right? But you kind of have a wake-up call when there's some stuff to manage. I like this one. Calm seas do not make a skilled sailor. Right? Now, I'm not against calm seas, believe me. It's very nice, right? But when things get rough, I mean, that's where you kind of hone your skills. You learn a lot about yourself. We learn a lot about ourselves as parents when kids are slamming doors and telling us they hate us. Or when there's a huge crisis, you know, not doing well in school, friends we don't like, came home drunk, hanging out with kids, you know, oh my God, right? I mean, that's when we get skilled. Keeps us sharp. But then it's nice to have breaks. All the other things we talked about, the nice stuff, right? So, a few quotes on this. Don't die on every hill. Good to maintain the mentality when you're, you know, don't die on every hill. How can you possibly die on every hill? You would not live long. Right? Do you know that pessimists live 7 years shorter than optimists? Honest. They have weaker immune systems. Because they die on every hill. Everything's a disaster. They didn't follow the advice of Carl Jung or Harold Nicholas. And it's a great, I say this to parents a lot when they walk out of my office. Remember, it's a great life if you don't weaken. Right? Take care of yourself. Be strong. Watch your state of mind. So, how do robust emotional bank accounts and positive sentiment inform conflict management? Well, so if we're doing all those things that we talked about in terms of staying turned toward one another, expressing fondness and admiration, catching people doing things right, having rituals of connection, letting people know that we love them and we care about them, in spite of the challenges that we have and the imperfections, that builds positive sentiment. And families who have a lot of positive sentiment and they have to manage conflicts, there's way more patience. People listen to one another more. They're not apt to explode on one another. Now, there's a lot of things that can influence that outside of these things, but generally speaking, when there's positive sentiment override and the bank accounts are full, that has an inoculating factor in keeping people less stressed out and more patient in managing conflict. That's why positive sentiment is so important underneath it all when we do end up having conflict that we have to manage. So Gottman gave us a cool thing, you know, all these years that he studied people. He calls them these four horsemen of the apocalypse. We don't want these four things showing up in relationships, okay? Because they have a very, 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 very corrosive effect on connection, right? Very corrosive effect. Here's what they are. One is criticism. So we never want to lead with harsh startups, like coming out of the box really heavy and hard. Like, I mean, how apt would you be to answer your door on a dark night if someone's out there slamming the door, as opposed to like, right? Harsh startups come off as criticism, right? And so does saying, you're such a whatever, or I never met anybody like this, and you're such a blah, 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 right? Criticism has a corrosive effect on interpersonal relationship dynamics. And it's not that you can't say stuff, it's just how it's said, right? Because it leads to defensiveness. So immediately when there's criticism, the person is already closed down and is not in any way, shape, or form interested in hearing what you have to say, at all. So criticism sets off defensiveness, which then, if people get upset enough, they stonewall. Anybody know what stonewalling is?
I'm not going to budge.
What is it?
I'm not going to budge.
Yeah, they don't budge. I'm not talking about this, right? I'm done talking about it. It's more a guy thing, but women do it too. That's not. I'm not making a.
What are the statistics on that?
It's really probably like 75-25. You know, so Gottman, I was interested. I said, Gottman, so why is that? So the reason we found that out in the research was because men get upset more intensely than women and stay mad longer. So the way they keep themselves from getting overwhelmed is stonewalling. I'm not talking about this. Okay, so now what are we going to do? We still have this problem, right? But men tend to get upset. And they sometimes enter what is called flooding or diffuse, if you want the technical term, diffuse physiological arousing. Their heart rate gets up over 100 beats per minute, and when that happens, rational problem solving is rendered useless, right? So, but the criticism and defense of this lead to stonewalling, I'm not talking about it. And then eventually if this cycles too much, then contempt begins to show up, which is basically just looking for what you don't like about somebody. Contempt is just just picking out what you don't like, right? And when that begins to happen, with parent-child relationships, partner relationships, husband, it's so corrosive to the whole operation, right? So that kind of stuff really does need to get repaired, and a lot of work in counseling is repairing this stuff. But it's not that hard to repair. Well, I shouldn't say it. It's hard to repair if it's been embedded for a long period of time, but that still can be, it's still repairable. But, so that's important. Those 4 things are good. If you want to see more about this, you can read that book, The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work. So flooding is when you really, if your heart rate's up over like 90 beats per minute, it's 90, not 100, 90. If your heart rate's up over 90 beats, so in couples therapy and family counseling, when we have families in there, I have these pulse oximeters. And you know what those are? They put those on your finger. It gives you your heart rate. And so you can tell. So after a while, families, if you're spending enough time with them, they don't even know you're there anymore, so they just act like they do at home. Right? So people just get right into it, and which I don't allow to happen very often. But then I say to the dad, hey, Dad, you can't scream. You can't scream here. This is not going to work. I'm not that upset. Okay, all right, just do me a favor. You put this pulse oximeter on, and let's just get a reading. And the thing's up at like 120 beats a minute. I said, okay, so here's what we're going to do now. Until this is down to like 86, we're not talking. We're going to watch slides of like flowers and waterfalls and stuff like that, right? And we're going to just breathe and get it calm. I'm not joking. Right? Because there's no way we can talk. Now, flooding is a really good thing if we're running from lions on the Serengeti. It's good to have that. The fight or flight thing is very useful. It's all about survival, but it's not good if we're trying to deal with kind of solving problems at home. Right? So that's important. If a family member, an adolescent, child, are raging, don't talk anymore. Next thing to do is, let's just calm down. And if you see somebody escalating, what's the next most important thing to do for you? De-escalate, right? They're talking loud, they're screaming and yelling, we're staying calm. We want them to enter our energy field, not theirs. So really, that's a really important tip. Especially like adolescents, especially. I mean, young kids can rage too, obviously, especially with some neurophysiological challenges. But that's a really important tip. It's really important not to talk when everybody's upset. Let's just calm down. We'll get back at it when we're calm. Right? Very important. So unless you're fighting or running to save your life when you're flooded, don't deal with anything when you're angry. Not a good thing. All right. Now, there is a difference between perpetual versus solvable problems. Here's the good news. 70% of the stuff that comes up in families are not solvable problems. They're perpetual issues. Same thing with marriage. The reason for that is because they're problems of persons' personalities, physiologies, and histories, and all kinds of things. And you always know when you're in a perpetual problem because it takes like 30 seconds to have the conversation come to a grinding halt. It takes about 30 seconds to say, not this again. Right? It takes 30 seconds for the husband I'm not picking on guys, but it's more a guy thing, to say, I'm not talking about this again, right? You know when that kind of stuff happens, you're in perpetual problem zones. 70% of the problems that come up are that kind of stuff. The problem is when they happen, people don't want to talk about it, so they enter gridlock. Like, you know, the teenager screams and everybody's screaming and gridlock and no one says anything. And then all this flooding happens, all these perpetual emotional things come up, people don't want to talk about it, so they just lay around the family landscape not solved. What does that do to someone's state of mind and stress? Any ideas? Not a trick question. What?
Nothing good.
No, right? Because there's all this accumulated stress. And you start telling yourself a story, like the story begins to be, I can't talk to this person, this kid's miserable, I can't believe I have this kid, I could be a great parent if I just didn't have these children. Right? I'd be an excellent husband if it were just another wife. Right? I mean, victim stuff, right? You start feeling sorry for ourselves. That becomes the story. I'm a victim. Wow, the world owes me. I deserve better than this. And when you're a victim, you just write yourself out of the equation. So you just dismiss yourself from any wrongdoing. No role in this, right?
I find it's like high school working with, I find sometimes two people really opposite, like the story they create as I saw, like, no one in this house is happy, so clearly I'm not.
Right. How important, like, right?
No.
So think about that. Think about walking around, kids, adolescents, adults, with the I suck state of mind life filter. That's the sunglasses through which everything is seen. Everything. Everything is distorted by this. In a world where it doesn't have any meaning, we're the painter. And nothing bad lasts. But kids distort things. They think it lasts forever. Right? So that's a very important distinction, right? So solvable things, perpetual problems, the most important thing is let's keep the dialogue going. Like, what's important to you here? What do you need? What do we need to do to solve this? Right? So that's important to know. If you keep running into the same stuff in your family that everybody fights over, join the club. 70% of the problems. That's normal. It doesn't mean happy, you know? It means it's normal. You're part of the club. That's awesome, right? The most important thing, though, is not to allow those things and the unsolved stuff that lays all over the landscape because everybody's ticked off and stonewalling and contemptuous to then begin to erode the fondness and admiration, the turning toward one another, and the connection. Because remember, that's the stuff that holds it together and keeps people safe. In the absence of those things, and too much of gridlock and negative sentiment, things fragment, right? And that's when things get dangerous. So, I love this quote from Wayne Dyer. You've heard of Wayne Dyer, right? Great writer. But he said, I love this. So, you know, the mind's a filter. I always tell people things like when they're coming in very discouraged, kind of negative about things. Hey, here's the good news. It's only a thought. Don't believe everything you think. It kind of falls in the same thing as, can you stop thinking? What? And the other thing is, don't believe everything you think. It's a perception, right? Because when you change the way you look at things, the things that you look at change. Instead of looking at what you think is wrong with your son or your daughter and all the things that you've contemptuously decided that's wrong with this person, begin to start catching this person doing things right. Change the momentum. Build positive sentiment. Strengthen the connection. It's just a thought. And when you do, the things you look at change. It's amazing stuff. Don't believe everything perception of the world is a reflection of our state of mind, and remember the sunglasses, right? So if we're having difficulty with connection, we're having difficulty working out conflict, think about what state of mind am I looking at that at? Built up resentment, negativity, or do I love this person, stay calm, and express to them calmly what it is I need, what my concern is. And then can I get this person to listen and understand it? That's the key. Not always easy when the momentum's been kind of the other way, but it absolutely is changing. I would not say that if I didn't mean that. That's changing, right? And it's essential. So, now, I'm going to take a real quick look at 15 minutes. Okay. I want to take a real quick look at the common cognitive distortions, the way distortions in how we think. Adults and adolescents and kids. All right, real quick ones. These are my personal favorites. Right? So, like, one of the things we do oftentimes is we personalize stuff. Right? So if our child, out of an anger thing, says, you know, you're like the worst parent I've ever could imagine. I hate you. Right?
Oh, the first time they told me to hate you, the first part.
And then, you know, we have these things called egos, right? We all have one, but some people really have big ones, and they make a total identity out of it. And when someone says something like that, what happens? What? The world's over. It's like, what? And they collapse, right? And so, you know, okay, they're angry, and they said something in a flooded state. Don't believe everything you think. Okay, let me just ask this question. I say this to people in counseling. Let me just say this. So right before the conversation, you had a certain perceived value of yourself. And then your kid, out of anger, said they hate you, and now you're worth less than you were 5 minutes ago? Your value went down? How can that happen? Our human value doesn't go up or down. It's always the same. The only thing that makes it appear that way is ego, which is an identity that we've created for ourselves in thought. So personalizing is like bad because we take things personally, and then we get all bent out of shape. And that becomes the filter, and all the stuff happens from there. Make sense? So watch for that. Don't take it personally. Your value doesn't rise or fall. That's the good news. Right? Catastrophizing. How about that one? That's an amazing one. You know, you get off the plane. Your wife is supposed to pick you up at the airport. Not there yet. Huh. Terrible car accident. Probably, who knows what happened. Probably not even alive. Instead of, maybe she got held up in traffic. Catastrophizing is the surest way to get your heart rate up over 90 beats per minute without having even another person around. You just think catastrophic thoughts. End of the world things. Die on every hill. Right?
It's like when your kid doesn't come home on the first time.
Yeah. And they didn't call. They got drunk the first time they came home drunk. Oh my God, it's over. Catastrophizing. And that really improves your effectiveness. Right? It's full catastrophe living. Everything's a crisis. Wow. And it takes a toll on people. So watch for that. It's like, is there anything else I can tell myself about this that wouldn't be the end of the world? Anything. That's a good way to start, like, working that through. Negative predictions. Oh, yeah. Kid got an F. I know where this is headed. No college, no job. Kid's like 6. Right? Probably end up in prison. And then you try to go to sleep. With that one spinning in your head. Right? I know where this whole thing's headed. That's similar to mind reading, where you know exactly what the other person's thinking, and then you operate on that as if it's fact. That's an amazing thing, where people think they absolutely know what's happening in the other person's mind, and they act on it. I know what you're thinking. You really hate me, don't you? What? No, I know where this is going. then you can throw a little catastrophizing in there and personalization, then you have a real good mixture, right? And then the shoulds and musts, that's an ego thing too. Like the world isn't cooperating with the way my mind thinks it should be set up. Right? Shoulds and musts. My kids should be this, must be that way. It causes a lot of frustration inside and causes us to give up more easily. Labeling, a big one. Look at the solution to all of these things is just be aware when we're doing this stuff. It really helps not to operate with these states of mind that change the dynamic. Right? So cognitive distortions. And then kids, now remember with children and adolescents, the human brain is not fully mature until 25. So someone who's 15 has another 10 years of neurocortex development where they begin to get into abstract reasoning and all of that. So it's no wonder that they have cognitive distortions. We're just bad at it because we've had these habits of thinking for so long we never changed them. Right? But kids, they can't really think that way. So when you're trying to talk to a child and reason with them sometimes, and they don't get it, it's because they don't get it.
Or a 20-year-old?
Or a what?
A 20-year-old?
Well, say it.
Okay, I live with the smartest 20-year-old ever.
Say that again?
I said I'm very lucky I live with the smartest 20-year-old
Oh yeah,
ever.
isn't it amazing?
Yeah.
And they're on the earth to teach you. The hopefulness is that they still have 5 more years of neocortex development to go, and it could all work out nicely, right? So the backdrop for distortions with kids, by the way, and how they think, and this is under the managing conflict stuff. You know, you got to understand that there are these distortions that exist that can really interfere with conflict management, right? And the brain really isn't mature until 25. And the kids who have some other neurophysiological challenges sometimes are 2 or 3 years behind that. Right? So important to know. So here's some common ones for children. The imaginary audience syndrome. This is where, that you think that when you walk into the cafeteria, the whole place is just looking at me. And the whole world is preoccupied with me. Right? Imaginary audience. I've got everybody watching what I do. And they believe this. Right? It's not just a funny thing. I mean, they really think that happens. It can be a real dilemma until you start beginning to work with their thinking to see that, everybody kind of has their own life too, and probably not that interested. I mean, maybe some do, but not everyone. Emotional reasoning, like if they feel down, then everything's bad. And if they feel angry, then everything's angry. They use emotions as the basis for determining what's going to happen, which is not a good thing to do, by the way. I mean, we want to have decision-making based on rational thinking, not emotional thinking. So that's why, again, the tool here is calming down. Let's wait till tomorrow. Let's see how we feel when we calm down. And let's come back and then talk about it when we're all kind of calmed down. Right? And see if we look at this differently. And inevitably they do. Black and white thinking. You can be like the most awesome parent in the world, like the best ever, if you're giving me everything I want. And if you say no one time, then God, you're awful. Black and white, no gray area. And that comes with maturity, maturation of the brain, right? Where you start having like, hey, maybe they're not so bad. Egocentric thought, that's common sense, center of the world, catastrophizing, they do that. And then no one else thinking, I hear this all the time, this is a big one. No one else's parents do this. Everyone else can do this. I'm the only person that doesn't. You're the only parents that do this. I'm the only one that has chores. Everyone has a car when they're 16, everyone. So, so in counseling, I kind of respectfully have fun with that, so in a good way. Not bring them to meeting, but I say to the kid, so listen, let me just understand this. I got to get the whole school together. How many kids in your school? Yeah, 700 kids. Okay, 700. We have an assembly, and we take a poll and say, everyone who owns their own car at 16, raise your hand. You're going to tell me every kid is going to raise their hand? Well, not everyone, right? So you're kind of trying to reverse engineer to the distortion until they get it right. So these distortions show up in the kids' thinking. It's important to know when you're managing conflict that there are challenges in the way we see things as adults and also kids. Okay, so let's talk really quickly I'm kind of rushed through this, but I think this is a really good thing. I would recommend a really good book for you to read. It was written by Ed Hallowell. Ed Hallowell, he wrote a book. His most popular book is Delivered from Distraction, about working with kids and people who have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. However, which is an awesome, awesome book, and he's a great, great speaker. But he wrote another really, really good book that I would highly recommend if you're a parent, and that is The Childhood Roots to Adult Happiness. It's a really, really good book, right? And some of the stuff we're talking about tonight, like connection, and a couple of these things I'm going to bring up now are in there. So when we talk about self-esteem, which is essentially the relationship that someone has with themselves in thought, right? How they think about themselves, right? Hallowell points out in his book that there are several important variables or roots to childhood happiness and resilience. One of those things is what we already talked about, connection, not social media connection, right? That's another 3 or 4 hour workshop, the risks and dangers of social media, right? That's a wild world out there, and that's not what we want to use as connection. It's not connection, right? But connection for all the things that we've already talked about tonight, right? That kind of connection, that's root number one. Another one is practice, practice. In other words, working hard at something, working hard at something. Whether it could be whatever you work hard at. It could be chores, it could be schoolwork, it could be sports, it could be something you have passion for, but you work hard at it and you practice. Because the difference between fragile and deserved self-esteem is that fragile self-esteem crumbles very quickly, right? Because there's no basis for it. It's not earned. And it comes from working hard at stuff, doing well at something, getting good at something, right? So that eventually, through practice, music, sports, academics, hobbies, Eagle Scouts, whatever, you get to a point of mastery. You get good at something. And you feel good at something, not because your parents said you're remarkable without any commensurate achievements, but because you know you're good at it because you've worked at it and you've mastered this. You feel a sense of control over it. That builds solid self-esteem. And for that comes recognition. This person's really good at this stuff. My God, that kid really worked hard. You ever hear of Carolyn Dweck? Carolyn Dweck wrote a book about self-esteem, and she did some interesting research, fascinating research actually, and her research was about kids that are told that they're really, really, really bright versus kids that are told they're hard workers. And the kids that were told they're really bright had nowhere near the resilience and the steadfastness to challenge that kids who were told they're hard workers had. Because there's the difference between fragile and deserved self-esteem. It comes from, not from what we tell our kids, but what they learn about themselves from working hard at something and mastering things. That's what creates resilience, getting good at stuff. And that's why it's so important about that state of mind, right? So they don't walk around thinking that they're losers or I suck. That state of mind is a key piece. And that's what we have to really target to keep kids safe, to keep kids sound and resilient, right? So important. And then discipline. I mean, consequences are really key. Without shaming, no flooding. Consequences are important, right? That's how we learn. There's no consequences, there's no learning. And that consequences are, I think, common sense. I mean, now, maybe that's the big thing now. I've been that for years and years, right? You come home late, can't go out the next night, You're not doing well in school, cutting back on video games. get in trouble with friends, got to make different connections, right? Consequences. If we tend to iron down every bump, you hear all the things, helicopter, snowplow parents and all that stuff. There is some truth to that. I mean, parents can get into a point of over-functioning and filing down every bump in the road. But what happens is that, remember we talked about calm seas don't make a skilled sailor. We're grinding down every little bump. I mean, they don't learn to be resilient. Consequences teach resilience. So it's important to do that, but without the shaming piece. Right? That's the reality. And so look at, and so here's an interesting concept. Like who owns the problem? Like, this is a great way of determining whether I should get involved with this and take ownership of it, or allow the child to take ownership of it. And one helpful pointer that I just found along the way that seems to help make that distinction is to ask the question, are any of my needs or rights being interfered with by this behavior? Are any of my rights as a person or parent being interfered with by this child's behavior? If none of the rights are being interfered with, then that's pretty much a child-owned problem. I mean, the kid doesn't do his homework. I mean, I guess you could be involved in that for sure, because you got to kind of set the example as a leader. But none of your rights are being interfered with, and you can't take more ownership of the homework than the kid.
It's true.
At the very least, it should be co-managed. But we have a situation sometimes where we take ownership of child-owned stuff, and the kids, that's your problem, right? And so teaching resilience means making sure that we have identified who's the proper owner of this in the first place. Right now, anything that's health and safety is always a parent-owned problem, right? At least co-owned for sure, right? We always have to be involved in those things. So, a couple of quotes to finish off. Children are educated by what the grown-up is and not by his or her talk. If you have never been hated by your child, you have never been a parent. When your children are teenagers, it's important to have a dog so that someone in the house is happy to see you. I love that one. That's for sure. Okay. 4 daughters, that's fine. It's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men and women. And that's for sure. So, we put the foundational pieces in place, which is what, I tried to share with you this evening. It was a broad brush stuff. I tried to include what I thought were the kind of the highlights that I picked up along the way. As you can see now that any one of these things could be talked about for a long time, right? We could go deep dive on a lot of this stuff. So, but you guys have been great. Are there any questions before we take off? Anything else? Thank you again, Kathy, Michelle, Carrie. Yes, I got it. This was great. You guys were great. Good for you to be here, right? Because, if we go back out and we take a few things that we can kind of implement, we're building some stronger foundations, right? That's helpful. So congratulations to you guys for being here. Again, if you want more information, there's a lot of stuff on there. Believe me, you can have it. It's free. Do whatever you can do with it. There's stuff on the practice. There's a flyer out there if you want information on that. And thank you very much.